Welcome back to Combat Mission Shock Force 2, where we're out for the night with the Germans. Not only is this battle different from the others in this series because it's fought in the dark, but it's also entirely infantry based. The scenario is under the power lines from the NATO module, and we've been helicoptered in to protect some electrical pylons serving the city of Aleppo from saboteurs. The game doesn't have any models for large-scale electric pylons, so we've got wooden telegraph poles instead. Doesn't really matter because we've got orders to clear the strip of ground they're on and destroy any enemy forces we come across. What the pylons look like isn't a big deal. The enemy force in question is a bit of a mystery. The only details I have is that they've driven here, it's unlikely that they consist of more than 100 men, and that no radio communications have been intercepted. The briefing never specifically states whether this battle takes place during or after the NATO invasion, but given that we're tasked with defending infrastructure, it feels like we're past the conventional warfare phase and we're starting to deal with guerrilla operations. The mission and the description of the enemy makes me think that I'm up against insurgents, something like armed government loyalists or fragmented regular army troops in civilian clothes. The briefing puts the lack of radio traffic down to radio discipline on behalf of the enemy. It might also be down to the fact that they're poorly equipped and they don't have any radios. The exact nature of the enemy force doesn't really make that much difference. The important part is that I know it's an infantry force with transport, and I'm expecting to be able to smack it around pretty well. I've got a company's worth of Gebirgsjäger at my fingertips. These are German mountain troops, and while this map is pretty much the opposite of mountainous terrain, functionally they're crack light infantry. I have 3 platoons, each made up of 3 squads with the usual NATO setup, 2 teams of 4, each with a grenade launcher and a light or general purpose machine gun, and a GPMG team with a tripod. The lead platoon is from the battalion support assets and also has a pair of snipers attached. Backing up my infantry, I have 3 Weasel armoured weapons carriers. These are basically little heavy weapons on tracks, tankettes, that are light enough to be carried by helicopter, but let the Gebirgsjäger bring some bigger guns to the fight. I've got 2 armed with 20mm cannons, and 1 armed with the TOW anti-tank missile. Planning-wise, I don't really have a tremendous range of options here due to the terrain. The map is pretty damn flat and split into fields by all these berms. The berms range from about 1 to 2 meters in height, and they're the only real source of cover. I'm going to be attacking from berm to berm, and the enemy is going to be defending from berm to berm. There's not going to be any slick combined arms warfare here to quickly unpick any problems. This is going to be a nasty, dirty infantry fight. Moving off, I'm pushing forward on a broad front with scout teams out in front. Everything is very quiet and dark right now, but the instant any firefights break out, both sides are going to be easily spotted by their muzzle flashes. I want as much firepower as possible online and ready to return fire and support my scouts when they find the enemy. This sounds pretty clever, but very quickly I've got to work out what to do when I reach the first berm. If I send some scouts over the top and they get engaged, the firefight will be taking place out of sight of my other troops who won't be able to offer any support. If I bring all my troops up and have them all crest the berm at the same time, then I'm taking the risk of exposing a significant number of pixel trippers to a new area that may or may not be well covered by enemy forces. In the end, I decide to pop the scouts up on their own, on the basis that they can always pop back down again if things are too hot. At the top of the berm, they get bumped. The enemy have spotted them first and get the first shots off. The Gebirgsjäger immediately put out a ton of return fire and we've got a firefight on our hands. The dominant factor here is who gains fire superiority. The side that puts out the most effective fire is the one that's going to avoid being pinned down, where it can neither manoeuvre nor return fire. And the Germans are the ones putting the lead out here. This team's gunner is armed with an MG3, that's the NATO 7.62mm version of the MG42, and it can put an atrocious amount of fire downrange. Along with a well-placed 40mm grenade launcher from an underbarrel AG-36 that takes out one of the targets, it quickly looks like the Gebirgsjäger have a good head start. The enemy was moving into the field up ahead, but now they've been forced to go to ground. There are more of them than there are Gebirgsjäger though, and not only is it a bit worrying that they get the first shots off, but what fire they're putting out seems like careful, aimed single shots, one of which connects with the Gebirgsjäger and takes them out. The enemy here aren't the insurgents I was expecting to find. These guys are actually heavily armed Syrian special forces, equipped with night vision goggles and weapon optics. Luckily that AG-36 grenade took out the Syrians' machine gunner, so they've lost their main source of sustained firepower, and I'm able to risk keeping the scouts in position until more German teams can move up to the berm to support them. I should probably qualify the idea of Syrian special forces here. The Syrian army is a different kind of beast to the Western ones that people north of the Brant line are more familiar with, and I'll get into that when I do a video on the Syrians, but the quick version is that in Combat Mission Shock Force 2 at least, Syrian army special forces are at best on par with the Gebirgsjäger in this scenario. That's been very, very generous to the Syrians. Within a few turns, the nearest German teams have crossed the field and gone up onto the berm where they take advantage of the suppression fire being put out by the scouts to destroy the enemy squad. After the last of the gunfire ebbs away, there's no sign of any more enemy forces out there. That means it's time to start moving forward again, though now I know what I'm up against, I'm going to be a little bit more cautious. The berm line I'm up to now is a bit higher than the next one along, so I should be able to keep most of my force on top of that to cover the next berm and the one after that. It takes a little time to move up, but a few turns later, my scout team on the right also runs into trouble. The berm ahead is the edge of the objective area, and it looks like this is where the Syrians have set up a defensive line. This is a very different contact to the last one. Not only do I have just 2 scouts up in front instead of a 4-man fire team, but there are more enemy pixel shovers and they're not moving forward, they're just sat there waiting. No one else in my force has been able to spot the enemy, and while I can put some area fire down on the spotting icons, it takes about 20 seconds for the Gebirgsjäger to really start putting the lead out, and by then it's too late for the 2 scouts. They've done their job though, we've found the enemy, and now we can start trying to build up our fire to drown out enemy fire and gain the superiority the Germans need to manoeuvre up and destroy them. So the first order of business is to move more teams forward and to ratchet up the suppressive fire. The first team forward is a full fire team now, and they quickly re-establish the spots and get stuck in. They attract a lot of fire, including several RPG-29s coming in from the right, but support is on the way. A lot of suppressive fire is going out and some of the enemy troops are starting to get knocked down. I'm also able to bring one of the weasels into the fight. This one is armed with a 20mm cannon and actually caught me off guard a bit. The other cannons I'm used to in Shock Force 2, the 25mm Bushmaster and the 30mm Raden, have pretty steady firing rates. In contrast, the Mark 20 machining gunner and 20mm Rheinmetall that the Weasel is carrying around is the MG42 of cannons and is capable of firing at a fairly ridiculous 1,000 rounds per minute. The nature of the terrain means that a lot of rounds overshoot the sail and burns into the pistons, but the suppressive capacity of a weapon like that is fantastic. I also have a sniper team over on my right flank that's getting in on the action, calmly picking off exposed Syrian Special Forces fighters whenever they stick their heads up. Over the space of a few turns, the Gebirgsjäger gain fire superiority. Both sides have taken casualties, but the Syrians have taken a lot more, and their fire has slackened off significantly. The next question is how to finish them. I'm pushing my left-hand platoon forward up to attack on the other flank in the hope that they can get around the enemy on the right and either mop them up or pressure them into falling back. And while they only meet light resistance, it's still night and the night vision goggles don't seem to be letting my pixel weapon identify discrete targets past about 250 meters, so I still have to move pretty close to the enemy to spot them. The question then is whether to move up to the enemy held berm on the right and attack from the front, using their own berm as cover, or to try and push down the berm from the left on the enemy side where no one is going to have any cover at all. I've got plenty of time to decide. On the right there's still light fire going out, pinning the Syrians in place, and on the left there are a few special forces teams that quickly get pinned down and stubbornly hang on until the last of them get picked off. In the end, I decide to try both. The left-hand platoon moves down a little bit so it can cover the centre, my centre platoon moves up and one squad starts moving along the berm to close with the enemy on the right, and one squad of my right-hand platoon shifts to the far right past my sniper team to assault the enemy over there. It's really those far right special forces that are causing me problems. They're actually in a good defilade position. It's difficult to suppress them from the front because they're behind the berm, but they can cover along both sides of it to their front, as my flanking teams in the centre discover when they come under fire. After taking a few casualties, it's clear that the fancy flanking move isn't the way forward, and rather counterintuitively, it's the frontal assault that's going to get the job done. That's actually less risky than it sounds because the enemy are in defilade. The same berm that shields the special forces from frontal suppressive fire also shields my approaching Gebirgsjäger from the Syrians. Defilade positions are great, but their frontal sections need to be covered, otherwise the enemy can just walk up and shoot you. Popping my pixel weapon over the top is still pretty risky. They're going to get stuck into close quarters battle pretty much immediately, which is always a little worrying. But assaulting the enemy doesn't necessarily mean fixing bayonets and charging in. Combat mission will allow infantry units to target the other side of nearby obstacles that block line of sight. They won't fire their weapons, but they will start throwing grenades over the top and onto the other side. This is definitely a good move. As the second part of that Gebirgsjäger squad on the right moves up, they take a little bit of fire from a second Syrian squad further back. If I sent men over the top instead of hand grenades, then not only would they be dealing with enemy troops at bayonet distance, but they'd also be coming under fire from at least one and possibly more enemy positions in depth. So a byproduct of finding that second position is that my teams over there spend a few more turns lobbing hand grenades over the berm while I shuffle some of my base of fire around to try and get fire on the enemy position in depth and get those special forces suppressed so that my assault team can move up and finish off the Syrians directly in front of them. I'm not going to physically assault the enemy until I'm happy that all the potential threats to my assault force are suppressed. That moment comes after the left flank's Weasel sprays the target area with some 3mm fire and one of the enemy squad behind them gets taken out by the sniper. That feels like enough to keep their heads down for a while, so the assault force goes in. Even here, it's an exercise in minimising exposure. They've got orders to pause for 20 seconds at the top of the berm, which is enough time for them to hose down any cowering survivors they find, then they run back down into cover again. Job done. While this has been going on, my other forces have been picking off the remaining Syrian special forces in the centre. There have been a few HQ, RPG-29 and sniper teams hanging around, but these are mostly gone by the time the assault on the right is finished. The last little nest of resistance is a squad in the centre, but after being heavily suppressed and taking casualties, the survivors eventually decide to make a break for it, only to be gunned down as they run back. To finish off, the tow-equipped Weasel finally contributes and takes out an enemy truck on the far right side of the map. It being nice to end on a bang, and with the game essentially being in the bag while mopping up a few Syrian Special Forces survivors, it's time for a ceasefire. Fairly unsurprisingly, it's a major victory for the Germans, with 1,085 points to the Syrians' 45. I've lost 9 men wounded and got 105 still kicking. The enemy has lost 51 dead, 25 wounded and 9 vehicles, all UAZ jeeps and trucks. I haven't totally cleared the objective area, so I haven't got points for that, but having inflicted such heavy casualties, that's not such a big deal. Once the enemy is all dead, the ground is yours by default. So that's that for the under the Powerlines scenario. Very, very different to step away from the combined arms and get back to infantry only basics. And while that means that there wasn't a lot of German kit on display, we've seen a lot of the German weapons with the Gebirgsjäger and their baby tanks, the Weasels, and we saw the Leopards with the Canadians in the last video. I might have to do a video with the Panzer Grenadiers and their Marders at some point, but that'll be after the Dutch, Syrian army and unconventionals get theirs. There's all that to look forward to, guys. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll catch you in the next video.